Tell me about your study. What did you and your colleagues look at?
We were interested in the health effects of early childhood adversity. And there had been lots of studies, one in particular, a really big study of adults, about 17,000 adults, where they found that adverse experiences early on were linked to bad health outcomes later in life. So things like your parents got divorced or you had a parent in jail, witnessing domestic violence. The more you had of those types of experiences, the more likely you were to have cardiovascular disease, have lung disease, COPD, have some bad habits like smoking, drinking. And this really took off in the literature, in the medical literature in particular. And we were interested in if that pattern existed earlier in childhood. So we took sort of a national database called the National Study for Children's Health. It's a survey of parents. It's about 100,000 kids in the sample, and we were looking at those same experiences. So things like, did you have a parent go to prison, witnessing domestic violence, parental divorce, mental illness, and then looking at almost 20 conditions. So physical conditions like asthma, vision problems, mental conditions like depression, ADHD, and then also developmental issues like learning disabilities, delay in reading or speech. And we were looking at the number of those adverse experiences and how they related to those conditions. And what we found is similar to adults, the more of those experiences you had, the more likely you were going to have at least one of those conditions. But what was really interesting is we found that not only were you more likely to have one of those conditions, but you're actually more likely to have comorbid conditions. So more likely to have not just a physical condition, but also a physical and a mental condition, or a physical, mental, and developmental condition. So what we're seeing is these experiences are pretty pervasive, or can be, as a negative impact on children's health.
What were the age range of the kids? Did you guys look at from the time that they face these adverse childhood traumas to when those symptoms or those conditions develop?
The kids were 0 to 17. And unfortunately, no, we don't have longitudinal data. So this is what's called a cross-sectional study, which means it's a single point in time. And the surveys were actually done with the parents. So there's certainly potential for a bias there. And what we asked, or what the survey asked, is if your child had any of these conditions. And the survey is really long, it's like an hour. And then later on in the study, it asks about those experiences at home. So has anyone in your household had a mental illness? Excuse me, have any of the caregivers had depression or suicide ideation or something like that? And so we can't know which one came first, the experience or the physical condition or the mental condition. And that's certainly a limitation in the study.
So your findings were the more of these adverse experiences the children had, the more likely they have these conditions. Are there certain numbers to those effects of like how much more likely?
The most profound one, I think, is we use this cutoff of 3 experiences or more, and that was based on that early study of adults, but it's semi-arbitrary. Certainly the more experiences, they sort of compound on each other, but sometimes only one experience repeated or very severe could have the same effect, but we just use the cutoff of 3. And so a cutoff, or having 3 experiences, was associated with almost a 6 times increase in likelihood of having at least one physical, at least one mental, and one developmental condition together. So pretty substantial.
What does that suggest?
It's suggesting that these adverse experiences certainly can have an effect on our health, and it's more than just our physical health, which we knew before, and that they can be seen early in childhood, or at least in childhood, not just later in adulthood. And so the positive is we can intervene early. You know, we should be taking note of those experiences and sort of looking for what the health outcomes might be early on in childhood.
That's basically for the parents and also the physicians or anybody else, like teachers, that could be involved in the child's life?
Absolutely. So pediatricians are already kind of on the alert about this, and there's been a movement toward pediatricians looking for these experiences and looking to offer assistance to their families and say, hey, if any of these things have happened to your child or going on in your life, they're really important for the child's health. So let's see how we can address these together. But also, I think it's important for parents to maybe take an inventory and say, what are some of these experiences that might have been happening in my child's life or have happened? And then certainly talk to your pediatrician, talk to your teacher, talk to whatever resources you have. And then also be on the lookout for some physical symptoms that might sort of be the product of those things. So sometimes when kids are really stressed out, they have tummy aches, they have headaches. And so think about what could that be from, and again, talk to your pediatrician about it, about how can we figure out where these symptoms are coming from and maybe address them early.
How often should it happen before parents should really be concerned about maybe this is not just something that's physical, it could also be something that's mental?
Anytime there's sort of unexplained symptoms, so if you ate a really big dinner, you might have a tummy ache, and that makes sense. But if you get a tummy ache every time you're sort of going off to school, it's like, well, why? What is it about going to school that's sort of bothering you physically? And that could be some sort of anxiety or something that the child isn't able to express because they don't know. They just know that I feel icky. And so looking for things that don't have an otherwise explanation. Same things with headaches or feeling avoidant about things, throwing tantrums more than what we would expect with toddlers or young children. And I encourage any parent, if you're concerned, talk to your pediatrician and they'll let you know if they think it's developmentally typical or not.
How is that trauma stress basically different in kids?
It's a big deal because our brains are developing. They're developing really fast, and they're constantly soaking in the environment more so than adults are. Adults do as well, but 0 to 3 is really when our brain is just firing all the time, trying to take in our environment and file away those experiences to figure out how do I navigate the world around me. And so every experience matters. And those experiences will shape the way that we react to our environment for a long time, even into adulthood. And so really what we believe is sort of the underlying factor here is that these stressful experiences are changing the way our bodies are responding to our environment at a neural and physiological level. It's not sort of an all or nothing. So I don't want families or anyone to think, oh, these things happened, great, my kid's brain is ruined. You certainly can come back from those things, and there's tons of literature to show that positive experiences can protect children and protect their brains from any of those bad experiences. So really, to answer your question, the difference between how adults experience these things and kids is that our brains are just sponges when we're really young, and so we're more susceptible to the environment.
You said positive experiences can help buffer against that. How can the parents help their child?
I will temper that and say a little bit of negativity is okay. So there's no need to try to protect your child in this bubble that they never experience anything negative. That's unrealistic, and that won't help them cope with life going forward. And so a little bit of negativity is completely acceptable and normal. But to kind of bolster that with positive things, it's a lot of positive interactions. So attention. So talking to your child, even very, very young infants, that face-to-face interaction is key. Physical touch, so cuddles and sitting together to read, those shared experiences, that's really the most important thing. And if parents are not around or parents are not the best fit for that, another positive adult can do that too. A grandmother can do that, an aunt can do that, a teacher can do that. And so a lot of literature has shown that just having one really important positive adult in a child's life can make all the difference for their entire life.
If you could just list again the different kind of conditions that you guys looked at for the kids.
We looked at physical conditions, so that's things like diabetes, broken bones, vision problems, hearing problems. The mental conditions are things like ADHD, depression, anxiety, and the developmental conditions are things like speech delay, learning disabilities, and intellectual disabilities. And we see that increase with the number of experiences. So again, that kind of arbitrary cutoff of 3 or more, we see that likelihood of having not just one of those conditions, but 2 or 3 of those types of conditions, just exponential.
What is toxic stress and how is that different from regular stress?
We conceptualize stress in sort of 3 categories. There's positive stress, tolerable stress, and toxic stress. Stress is broadly defined as sort of our body's arousal and sending cortisol and adrenaline through our body. It helps mobilize us, it helps us sort of react to our environment. And so good things can cause that too. So I remember when I was getting married and I was about to walk down the aisle, I was definitely flooded with those hormones, but it was good. You know, I was excited, it was something good was about to happen. So that's positive stress. Tolerable stress is when it's maybe a little negative, but you can tolerate it. Like you have something positive going on with you. So it might be, I'm going to the doctor, I'm not really sure if I'm gonna get a shot that day or not. Kind of uncomfortable with it, but you know, if I'm a child, I have my mom or dad with me, they're holding my hand, I'm gonna get through it, it's gonna be okay. It's gonna be short term, and then we're gonna go home, I'll be better. Toxic stress is when you're flooded with those hormones and you don't have a positive buffer, and it generally doesn't stop quickly. So it's something that's going on chronically, and there's no reprieve from it. So sort of on the more extreme end, kids who are experiencing abuse and neglect. And so if I come home and I'm not sure if my parent has been drinking that day or not, I don't know how they're gonna react to me. So I'm constantly on edge to say, I don't know if I'm gonna get in trouble today or not. I don't know if I'm gonna eat tonight or not. And so that is what we call toxic stress. It's that really chronic stress without a protective buffer.
Is there anything that I didn't ask you that you feel like people should know?
I think it's important for parents to know, or family members of children to know, that everything that kid experiences is important, good and bad. And so I think there's a misconception among adults who maybe don't have a lot of experience with children that the child's too young to understand. They're not taking in things because they don't know what words I'm saying, they don't understand this television program, you know, they don't speak yet, so they don't get it. That is 100% false. Babies are so smart. They're constantly taking in their environment, filing away experiences, figuring out who's good, who's bad, how do I react to this person or that person. They're fantastic at reading mood and tone. And so everything we do matters for the negative and the positive. So every positive interaction is key. Reading to your child is not just about building their vocabulary. It's about that physical touch of sitting close together while you're looking at a book, the shared attention, the child knowing, hey, my mom or my dad or my grandma is giving me 20 minutes of their time and it's just me and that person. And that is so important. So I just encourage people to look at children not as, oh, they're not old enough to understand yet, but look at them as actually smarter than us, because they need to survive. They're constantly trying to figure out what's going on in the world.
Where did you get your bachelor's, master's, any advanced degrees?
My bachelor's degree came from the University of North Florida. My master's and PhD came from the University of Georgia. Go Dogs.